So now that we've learned the basics of note duration and the staff, let's start to talk about how notes would work on the staff other than using them to name them. So I've got our basic building blocks of rhythm over in the top left-hand part, and let's just go ahead and rename these and give them counts. So, oops, let's not use that one. So the first one, it gets 4 counts and it's a whole note. I'll abbreviate for today. Second one gets 2 counts and it is a half note. Third one is a quarter note and it gets 1 count. And finally, the last one is an eighth note and it gets, let's change that around. Is an eighth note and it gets half of the count. And also, if you remember, if you have 2 eighth notes in a row, they have to be beamed. They cannot each have their own little separate flag like the single eighth note is shown. So again, each of those gets half of a count, but when they're put together like this in an eighth note group or an eighth note pair, they get 1 count. So we'll give that its own little category, an eighth pair. Different from a single eighth note. So 2 different ways to use our eighth note here. So now let's go back up to our staff. I have the 5 lines of the staff drawn out. And when I start to separate my staff with these vertical lines, these are called bar lines. And then at the very end, I can add an extra bar line, and if I make the very last one extra thick, then it's called an end bar line. So we've got 2 bar lines and then an end bar line over here that tells me that this is the end of the song. It's like the period at the end of the sentence. So then I'm left with these 3 sections here. Each of these 3 sections are called measures. You can have unlimited amounts of measures in a song, and the more measures that you have, then the longer that song is going to be. When I'm only using a single line right here, this tells me that I'm not going to be worried about the different notes on the staff. I'm only going to be looking at it to use rhythmically, meaning I'm only going to use my rhythm notes and not worry about if I'm writing an A or a B or a C or a D like I would. So it's not a melody, it's just rhythm. Your percussion instruments like drums or other extra percussion instruments like the triangle or the tambourine, they would read off of a rhythm line only. But instruments that have to worry about having different pitches and creating a melody line, like a singer reading a line to sing, or a violin, or a saxophone, they're going to be reading off of a staff because they're thinking about the pitch and the rhythm at the same time. Percussion instruments don't have pitch. Well, unpitched percussion instruments don't have pitch, but that's a discussion for a different day. There are percussion instruments that have pitch. So for this one, I have my rhythm line. I'm going to add a double bar line at the end. And as you can see here, I still have measures. They're just not drawn on a staff. And when I get through, I can count. And I've created 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 different measures with this rhythm line. So we're just going to label this right here so we don't forget. This is called a rhythm line. Now you might be wondering, well, how do I start fitting these notes into the rhythm line or into the staff line? So the very first thing that you need is something called a time signature. A time signature looks a lot like a fraction that hasn't been simplified like your math teachers have taught you. In music, we don't simplify them. We use them exactly as they are because they tell us very specific things. So in our time signature, 4/4, that's what this one is called, is the most common time signature to see. The top number tells us something completely different from the bottom number. And the top number tells us the number of counts in a measure. Whereas the bottom number tells us what type of note gets the count. So the bottom number is a 4. It refers to the quarter note, and it tells us that the quarter note gets the count. Gets the beat. So the way that this works in our rhythm or our staff line, I'll create measures again. What this is telling me is that I can fit 4 counts into the space of a measure. I can do that with any of these rhythm notes up here. So the easiest way to do that would be to put a whole note in there. I can only fit one whole note in there because it takes up all 4 counts of my measure right in one type of note. So right here, I've got 4 counts, and then I'm done. That's all I can fit in that measure. Done. I can get creative and I can do different combinations of notes. I could do 2 half notes. Again, that gets me up to 2 counts. This gets the first 2 counts, 1 and 2. This gets the remaining counts, 3 and 4. I'm still showing that my half note gets 2 counts because it takes up count 1 and count 2. And I'm still showing that this takes up 2 counts because it gets count 3 and count 4. You always want to try to show all 4 counts when you're counting out your measure if it has to get to 4 counts. Not always are we going to get to 4 counts, but again, that's a discussion for a different lesson. And let's actually add another measure in here because I want to show one more type, getting all of our types of notes that we have up here. I can now fill in, think to yourself, how many quarter notes could I fit into this measure? Give you time to think, maybe answer out loud at your home. So if you answered that the quarter note gets 1 count by itself, and I can fill 4 in a measure, so therefore I would be able to fit 4 quarter notes in this measure, then you were correct. I'm going to go the next step, and I will put the counts underneath each quarter note. I would not do it this way. I see this often because you're telling yourself, well, it gets 1 count, so I'm showing 1 count, 1 count, 1 count, 1 count. Well, again, remember, we want to show that we've gotten up to 4 within each measure. So by writing 1, then going to 2, you're saying that it goes automatically to the next count, it only gets 1. It goes automatically to count 3, so it only got 1 count. Automatically to count 4, so again, it only got 1 count. And then finally, I can fit eighth notes in here. But if you recall, an eighth note by itself gets half of a count. An eighth note where there are 2 of them together, 1/2 plus 1/2 equals 1 whole or 1 whole count. Not a whole note, don't confuse it. It's going to be tight, but I can fit eighth notes in here, and I'm going to beam them every 2. So I've got 1/2 and 1/2, so that's 1 count. I've got another 1/2 and 1/2, so that's a 2nd count. Another 1/2 and 1/2, that's a 3rd count. I'm going to run out of space, but hopefully you get what I'm trying to show, and that's a final count. So here I've tried to show you how you would use an eighth note or a whole note, how you could use half notes, how you could use quarter notes, and finally how you could use eighth notes. So let's start mixing them up. Let's put our 4/4 at the beginning of our staff lines this time. We'll separate it into measures. I'll put a double bar line at the end to show that this is the end of our song here, we'll call it. And now I'm going to know that I can get up to 4 counts in each measure. And I'm going to start mixing them up. Let's not start off with a whole note because then that doesn't give us any room to mix some of our notes up. Let me redraw our note options down here. And I'm not going to bother drawing the eighth note by itself. We'll just start off right by drawing our 2 eighth notes together. Let's switch colors. I like blue. All right, let's start off with a half note. When I do that, that tells me that I've taken up counts 1 through count 2. Then I should have remaining counts 3 and count 4 that I can fill up. In those remaining 2 counts, count 3 and count 4, I can't fit a whole note. I could fit another half note, so we could do that. We could put another half note in here and that would work. Or I could draw 2 quarter notes. Or I could draw 1 quarter note and then an eighth note group, and that would still work because I'm showing count 3 is my quarter note, and then count 4, because it's split into 2 halves, because eighth notes each get half of a count, it works just like that. But when I start using eighth notes, I didn't show how to do that up here because we were just starting out, but when I start using eighth notes, remember I want to show every single one of my notes and how they fit into 4 counts. I actually need to put an and here because an eighth note, it divides beat 4 into 2 equal parts, so it would be 4 and. If I were counting this out loud, the half note holds through beat 2, so I would hold out my voice to show that it holds through. If you were singing this note would be held out for the full 2 counts, then beat 3 and then beat 4. So let me just demonstrate how I would perform this, just speaking it. It would be 1, 3, 4, and. Let's move on to our second measure. Let's keep going with these eighth notes because they're fun. Eighth notes take up beat 1, and I have to put 1 and because it divides beat 1 into 2 equal parts. Then let's do another group of eighth notes. 2 and then let's do a quarter note and then a half note. Quarter note takes up beat 3, half note takes up beats 4 and 5. No, that doesn't work. So you see there, that essentially has had me fill up this measure with too many counts. I can't fit these many notes in it. We've reached capacity. So instead of having that half note at the end, I need to do something different that only takes up 1 count. My options would be to do another quarter note or do an eighth note pair. So I'm actually just going to do another quarter note for ease. So this is beat 3 and this is beat 4. And you can really fill anything as long as it fits, but just for sake of time, I'm going to finally use one of those whole notes, and it takes up the entire measure. So for this time for the whole note, I'm going to write it out the way I would perform it. Because a whole note holds through all 4 counts, I need to show that my voice, when I would be counting this out loud, would hold through all 4 counts. So I would hold out 1, all 4, and in my head I would think, or maybe if you're counting on your fingers while you're holding out 1, in my head I would think 1, so it gets all the way through all 4 counts there. So hopefully this was a lot to take in, but hopefully this was a nice introduction to how we fit our building blocks of music into the actual staff and the rhythm lines themselves. Thanks, guys.